Overnight tonight, the latest developments demand your full attention. And once you hear this, you'll understand why. Just hours ago, behind closed palace doors, King Charles III quietly signed a royal warrant of appointment, one of the most significant orders issued in over 3 decades. And Catherine, Princess of Wales, didn't just know about it. According to senior palace sources, she shaped it. She influenced it from the ground up. And the reaction inside royal circles has been nothing short of seismic. If you like and subscribe right now, you won't miss a single update on this story because it is moving fast. Before we dive deep into what this order actually says and why it matters so much, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. What is happening inside the royal household right now is unprecedented, and this is exactly the kind of story that does not always make it to your regular news feed. You need to be here for it, and here is my question for you. After you hear everything I am about to tell you, do you believe Catherine's growing influence over the crown is the best thing that could happen to the British monarchy right now? Or do you think this kind of behind-the-scenes power shift sets a dangerous new precedent that the palace should never have allowed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. Strong feelings on both sides of this one. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will have something very specific to say. Now, let me walk you through what happened, and why what looks like a quiet administrative order may actually be one of the most consequential decisions Charles has made since his coronation. This is not just another royal headline. This is not just paperwork being shuffled around inside Buckingham Palace while the rest of the world goes about its business. Royal warrants of appointment have existed for over 500 years. 500 years. They are the formal mechanism by which the Crown signals trust, values, and priorities to the nation and to the world. When the Crown grants one, it is saying, this is who we trust. This is who represents our standards. This is what we stand for. Since the reign of Henry VIII, yes, back to the 1500s, these warrants have functioned as a seal of royal approval that carries enormous commercial, cultural, and symbolic power in British life. Let me give you a sense of just how deep this tradition runs. Queen Victoria used the warrant system to reward British craftsmanship and manufacturing during the height of the Industrial Revolution. Businesses that supplied the royal household were allowed to display the royal coat of arms on their products and their shop fronts. It was the most powerful commercial endorsement in the world at that time. Queen Elizabeth II continued that tradition, but adapted it carefully. In 2012, she quietly introduced guidelines requiring warrant holders to demonstrate environmental responsibility. Most people barely noticed. But those who study the monarchy closely understood exactly what that moment meant. The Crown was beginning to say that its endorsement was not just about quality, it was about values. And now Charles has signed a new order that takes that principle further than it has ever gone before. Here is what you need to understand about where things stand right now. Charles has been on the throne since September 2022. He has had nearly 3 years to reshape how the warrant system works. Until now, the changes were relatively minor: streamlined administration, a leaner approach, quiet adjustments that made headlines nowhere. But here is where it gets really interesting because this order is different. This order touches something deeper, and multiple senior palace sources are now saying that Catherine was not just consulted on this decision. She drove the conversation. She pushed for specific language. She advocated for priorities that, according to royal analyst and author Roya Nika, reflect a clearly forward-looking vision of what the Crown should represent over the next 50 years. Let that sink in. Catherine, who has spent years carefully building her public image, navigating serious illness, supporting her husband, raising 3 children in the full glare of public scrutiny, has now stepped into a position of genuine institutional influence. Not ceremonial influence. Not symbolic influence. Real, documented, on-the-record influence over a formal royal decree. And the palace has not pushed back on a single word of this reporting. Not one word. Now let me walk you through exactly what is in this order, because the details matter enormously and most of the coverage out there is skipping right past them. The royal warrant of appointment update signed by King Charles includes 3 primary changes. First, it introduces a new category of eligibility focused on sustainability and ethical sourcing. Second, it raises the minimum supply period required before a business can even apply, from 5 years to 7. And third, and most significantly, it creates a brand new external advisory panel to oversee the entire application process. That panel, according to a Buckingham Palace briefing document released on Monday, will include representatives from environmental organizations, charitable bodies, and community sectors from across the United Kingdom. That third point. Think about that for a moment. For 500 years, the warrant system was managed almost entirely by royal household officials and the Lord Chamberlain's office. An entirely internal process, insulated from outside voices and outside perspectives. No external scrutiny, no outside input. The Crown decided, and that was final. Charles has now opened a formal channel for people outside the palace walls to shape which businesses and institutions receive the Crown's endorsement. That is not a minor administrative tweak. That is a structural change to one of the oldest mechanisms of royal power in the world. And it doesn't stop there, because Catherine's fingerprints are all over this advisory panel idea specifically. Royal biographer Robert Hardman, who has spent decades studying the inner workings of the palace, and whose book Queen of Our Times, The Life of Elizabeth II is considered one of the definitive accounts of the modern monarchy, told reporters this week that the advisory panel model closely mirrors work Catherine has championed through the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Since 2021, Catherine has quietly built that foundation into one of the most evidence-based, outcome-driven royal charitable operations in modern history. She did not simply put her name on initiatives and show up for photographs. She insisted on measurable results. She pushed for formal partnerships with universities and research institutions. She wanted documented proof that the work was making a genuine difference, not just good intentions on paper, but real impact in real communities. And now that exact philosophy, evidence first, accountability built in, external voices welcomed rather than feared, has been written into a formal royal order carrying the king's signature. Let that sink in, and it does not stop there. The sustainability requirements in this new order also echo the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which Charles himself launched while still Prince of Wales back in 2020. But insiders are pointing out that the specific language around ethical supply chains and community impact goes further than anything Charles had previously proposed on his own. Several palace watchers have attributed that language directly to Catherine's early childhood policy work, her multi-year research project through the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, which she launched in 2021 and has expanded methodically and patiently every single year since. Dr. Mary Dixon Woods, a leading policy researcher at the University of Cambridge who has collaborated directly with Catherine's team, has publicly described the princess's working approach as rigorous, patient, and deeply committed to evidence. Those same qualities are now embedded in a royal decree. Think about what that actually means. But here is what will really make you think. This order was signed quietly. No press conference, no fanfare. No announcement designed to generate attention or headlines. The palace released a brief statement, 87 words, and attached the full 14-page document as a download on the official royal website. That was it. Now ask yourself why. Why would one of the most consequential changes to the warrant system in a generation be announced so quietly? According to multiple sources who spoke to the Times this week, the decision to keep this low-key was entirely deliberate. The palace did not want this to become a political story. They did not want a loud national debate about the monarchy overstepping its boundaries. They wanted this order to take effect before the criticism had time to mount and organize itself. That tells you something very important. That tells you the people inside that palace know exactly how significant this is. They know this changes things in ways that will be felt for decades. And they made a calculated decision to move fast, say little, and let the document speak for itself. And it doesn't stop there. Because within 12 hours of that document being published online, 3 sitting members of the House of Lords had already submitted formal questions about the new advisory panel, specifically about how its members would be appointed, who would hold them accountable, and whether the panel itself would be subject to any form of parliamentary scrutiny. That is fast. That is unusually fast for the House of Lords, which does not move quickly on anything. Lord David Pannick Casey, one of the most respected constitutional lawyers in the entire United Kingdom, was quoted on Tuesday saying that the creation of an external advisory panel attached to a royal prerogative function, and the warrant system sits entirely outside parliamentary control, raises what he called legitimate and interesting constitutional questions that will need to be worked through very carefully indeed. A change quietly shaped in part by Catherine, Princess of Wales, has prompted constitutional commentary at the highest levels of British public life within 24 hours of its release. Let that sink in. But here is where I need you to really pause. Because underneath all the legal language and the constitutional debate, there is a deeply human story happening here. And it is a story about someone who almost was not here to see this moment at all. Less than 18 months ago, Catherine was diagnosed with cancer. She stepped back from public duties. The palace issued careful, measured statements. The world held its breath. Millions of people, including many of you watching right now, genuinely worried about her. Not because she holds a royal title, not because of protocol or ceremony, because she is a mother of 3 young children. Because she is a person who has shown up, year after year, with warmth and grace and genuine commitment in a role that demands an almost impossible standard from the human being who fills it. She came back, and she did not come back diminished. She did not come back simply to fulfill engagements and smile for cameras. She came back with something to say. She came back with a purpose that is now written into official royal documents bearing the king's signature. Think about that for a moment. The advisory panel idea embedded in this order was not drafted overnight. Palace sources who spoke to the Times this week described a process that began during Catherine's recovery period. Months of reading, months of thinking, months of quietly considering what the monarchy needs to look like not just for today, but for the generation that comes after William and Catherine themselves. Her children's generation. George, Charlotte, Louis. While she was recovering from a cancer diagnosis, Catherine was thinking about how to make the institution her children will one day be asked to serve more accountable, more credible, and more genuinely connected to the world as it actually exists in the 21st century, not as it existed in 1953. Think about what that says about who she is. And there is something else here, something the mainstream headlines have almost entirely missed. Among the new eligible categories under the revised warrant criteria, there is explicit recognition of organizations working in mental health support and early childhood development. Those are not random additions. Those are not bureaucratic filler. Those are the 2 areas Catherine has devoted the most sustained personal energy to over the past decade. The Heads Together Mental Health Campaign, the Early Years Research Program, the years of quiet, consistent advocacy. She did not simply influence this order as a palace insider with access to the right meetings. She influenced it as someone who has spent years building the public case, with research, with data, with personal commitment that went far beyond what was required of her, that these issues are not soft concerns. They are central to the health of the nation. The great royal historian Dr. David Starkey once observed that the British monarchy survives not because it holds power, but because it holds meaning. Meaning, he argued, is what gives the crown its genuine authority in a democratic age. Catherine appears to understand that observation at a profound level, and she has spent years doing the patient, unglamorous work of building that meaning piece by careful piece. The response on social media since Monday evening has been extraordinary. Comments pouring in on the official palace accounts from people across the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and the United States. People writing things like, "She has worked so hard for this and she more than deserves it." And this is exactly what the modern monarchy should look like. And again, simply, "Diana would be so proud." That last one, that keeps appearing in comment after comment after comment. Diana would be so proud. And you understand why, don't you? Because Diana herself fought, inside that same institution, to have her voice matter. To take what the crown represented and point it toward the people who needed it most. She fought to talk about mental health at a time when the palace considered it deeply inappropriate. She fought to be present with AIDS patients when the world was still consumed by fear and stigma. She fought to be human inside an institution that too often rewarded the performance of duty over the reality of it. She did not always succeed. The institution pushed back, hard. It was painful and it was public and it was heartbreaking to watch. Her son is now king. And his wife, who has worn Diana's jewelry on the most significant occasions of her royal life, who has honored Diana's memory with consistency and grace and genuine feeling from the very beginning, is now shaping royal policy in ways Diana never had the opportunity to. That is not a coincidence. That is not optics. That is a thread of purpose running from one generation to the next through loss and time and everything that came between. That is not a footnote. That is history. So what does this all actually mean for the future of the monarchy? And I want to be clear that this question goes far beyond the palace gates and the pages of royal biography. The British monarchy is at a crossroads that serious historians will study for a very long time. On one side, you have the argument, a legitimate one, that the crown's enduring power comes precisely from its separation from ordinary politics, its mystique, its distance, its unchanging rituals that connect the present to a past stretching back 1,000 years. On the other side, you have the argument, equally legitimate, that an institution which cannot demonstrate relevance to ordinary people in 2026 will not survive the reign after next. This order comes down firmly and deliberately on the second side of that argument, and the implications reach far beyond the United Kingdom. In Australia, where the Republican debate has never fully gone away, commentators are already noting that a monarchy which demonstrably adapts, which holds its commercial relationships to higher ethical standards, which actively invites outside scrutiny rather than fearing it, is considerably harder to argue against than one that appears to exist solely to preserve the privileges of a small hereditary elite. The Sydney Morning Herald ran a piece on Wednesday under the headline, "Is the Palace Finally Doing the Work?" That is a significant shift in framing from a publication that has long been deeply skeptical of the Crown's relevance in modern Australian life. In Canada, similar conversations are unfolding. The question of whether a distant hereditary monarchy can be genuinely meaningful to a multicultural, forward-looking 21st century nation has been live for years. But when the Crown begins formally aligning its structures with values that Canadians broadly share, sustainability, accountability, community impact, evidence over tradition, the conversation shifts in ways that matter. Here is the comparison that puts everything in the sharpest possible perspective. In 1953, when Queen Elizabeth II was crowned, there were 800 active royal warrant holders across the United Kingdom. By the time of her death in September 2022, that number had fallen to approximately 400, cut in half over 7 decades. That decline was driven by consolidation, by changing consumer habits, and by a deliberate and careful pruning by the palace under Elizabeth's guidance. The warrant became more selective under her, more meaningful, harder to earn and therefore worth more when you had it. Charles is now taking that principle in an entirely new direction. Under the revised criteria, the question is no longer simply, have you supplied the royal household for 7 years? The question is now also, do you meet standards of ethical practice, environmental responsibility, and community contribution that the Crown can publicly and proudly stand behind? That is a fundamentally different proposition. It is the difference between the Crown functioning as a loyal customer and the Crown functioning as a statement of national values. And Catherine's influence in driving that shift is now part of the permanent official record. Royal commentator and broadcaster Juliet Reedon, writing in the week earlier this month, described what is unfolding inside the palace as a quiet revolution driven by a woman who understands that institutions only survive when they earn their place in each new generation. That is a precise observation, and it is an important one. Whether you believe the monarchy should exist at all, and that is a completely legitimate question to ask, you have to recognize what is happening here. The institution is not standing still. It is moving. And the direction it is moving in carries Catherine's thinking at its core, even though her name does not appear once in the document itself. Personally, I think what we are watching is something genuinely significant, and I want to be careful not to overstate it, because this audience deserves honesty and not hype. Catherine is not running the country. She does not hold legislative power. The Crown's formal constitutional role in the United Kingdom is narrow and carefully bounded by centuries of precedent, and nothing about this order changes any of that. But influence is not the same as power. And what this order reveals, quietly, through the specific details that most people are skipping past, is that Catherine has built something far more durable than a public image. She has built real credibility, inside the institution, with the king himself, with the officials who actually draft these documents, with the researchers and advisors who shape the palace's long-term thinking about what the monarchy needs to become. That credibility did not arrive as a gift. It came from years of showing up consistently, from the early years' research that nobody asked her to commission, from the mental health work that went far beyond what protocol required, from the disciplined, patient, evidence-first approach that palace sources now describe every single time they talk about how she operates behind closed doors. She did not arrive at this moment overnight. She earned it across more than a decade of deliberate, quiet, unglamorous work. And I think most of you watching right now, whether you have followed the royal family for 40 years or came to this story only recently, you recognize what that kind of earned credibility looks like, because you have lived long enough to know the difference between someone who talks about doing things and someone who actually does them. Catherine has done the work, but that is just my take, and now I want to hear yours, and I mean that genuinely. Here are my questions for the comments, and I want specific answers if you are willing to give them. First, Do you think Catherine's growing role in shaping palace policy is a sign that the monarchy is finally modernizing in a real and meaningful way? Or does it concern you that someone who was never elected is having this level of influence over formal royal decisions that affect the whole country? Second, do you think King Charles was right to sign this order quietly, or should a change this significant have gone through a far more public and transparent process before it took effect? And third, when you look at the full arc of Catherine's story, from the early years of intense public scrutiny and pressure through her illness to this moment, what does it tell you about the kind of person she genuinely is? Drop your answers below. I read every single comment, and this is exactly the kind of conversation this community handles better than anywhere else on the internet. And if you have not already done so, please subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because this story is absolutely far from over. There are still unanswered questions about how the advisory panel will be appointed, how the new eligibility criteria will actually be enforced in practice, and what all of this signals for the next phase of Charles's reign as his health continues to be a matter of public concern. We will be covering every development as it happens, and you do not want to be the last to know. If you found this deep dive valuable, share it with someone who cares about the royal family, about British history, or about how great institutions either adapt and survive or resist and fade. This is the kind of story that deserves a far wider audience than it is currently getting. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.